Today on the Tech Your Business podcast, where we show you different ways to you can use technology to grow your business and stay ahead of the competition. We'll be talking about what the guest today is doing, which is podcast guesting. A lot of the time, just like we were having a discussion not too long ago, and a lot of people don't really understand podcasting. A lot of people don't understand how necessary it is, and a lot of people too don't understand why they should be a guest on other podcasts, especially when they start a podcast. A lot of people start a podcast, stay within their podcast. They don't really think of getting on other podcasts and expanding their brand. So today we'll talk about this with our guest today, Sarah Lohse. So welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So can you just tell us a bit about your history, how you got down here to talking
Yeah,
about podcast guesting?
sure. So I started producing podcasts back in around 2019, 2020. And as a producer, I saw the best and the worst of podcast guests and podcast hosts. And for a couple years, I just learned the ins and outs and the best practices, what to do, what not to do. And I got really into it and really just invested in the whole idea of using podcast guesting as a marketing strategy, but doing it in a way that is very content and value forward and not something that feels marketing-y. So I launched my company, Favorite Daughter Media, in 2022 and have been really focused on helping people become great guests, helping people get on podcasts as a guest, and how to tell their stories and the really focusing in on that whole concept of storytelling and using your story on a podcast to create connections and build an audience and become a thought leader.
Interesting. So now, when you talk to these clients, you talk to about getting on other guests, sharing their story, and building their business in the process. What's one thing that's in common with them that they believe? What's one thing in common that they believe, but you know it's not true about podcast guesting?
Everyone seems to think that they do not have a story, which I find mind blowing because everybody has a story. Everyone has a whole lifetime worth of stories. So when I talk to someone and the first conversation that I have about podcast guesting is about storytelling and how you need to lead with stories, tell stories, and they just look at me like, how? I don't have a story? That is so common. It's so common. And it's so untrue. So I spend a lot of time trying to break that and get people to understand that they have stories and the value that lies in their stories is something that they need to share.
Amazing. And I think I've been on a couple of podcasts, like I was telling you before the show started. And at first, I didn't really know what to talk about. But I know there is one thing they say that when you look back in your life, the dots actually connect. And when I look back how I got to this point from all the things I've done before to this point, I just realized, yeah, a lot of things that looked like they weren't relevant or they weren't really connected. I just said, okay, actually, this thing actually connects to why I'm doing this, why I'm here, and all that. So I think that thing you said is true. That a lot of us believe we don't have a story, but we really do. So now, for a person who wants to start guesting on podcasts and they are thinking of probably they've had a lot of life experience over time and they are thinking of what stories to share on these podcasts. How do you identify which of the stories from their journey that would resonate most with listeners and would help build their brand too?
Yeah, it really depends on the person, but we always have to start with their goals. So, what is the goal of being on a podcast and looking at the why for what they're doing and just what's the message that you want to get across? Because one of the things that I am really adamant about with people who want to be podcast guests is that this is not meant to be treated like a marketing opportunity. This is not meant to be treated like ad space. That is not what a podcast is. That's what an infomercial is. And that's really a completely different set of media skills. But this is a podcast. This is a conversation. This is value. This is entertainment and education. So, really looking at what your goal is for going on the podcast and what the message is that you're trying to share, because that's going to guide us towards where we're going to find those stories.
Interesting. So now you said, I think that one thing you said really this and that it's not an infomercial. It's not an infomercial, so it's a different set of skills, like you said. So now, for a business person who wants to craft a story that can lead to business opportunities, but it's not an infomercial, like you said, it's not salesy. What's the
Yeah.
best way for them to craft a story around their journey, around their business?
Yeah, the best thing that you can do is tell stories that are personal. And when I say that, I don't mean it has to be like your childhood trauma story, because some people really think that they have to lead with that, that it always just has to be super, super emotional. And it really doesn't. But when you tell a personal story, it's just talking about something that you've been through. And when you talk about things that you've been through in your career and experiences that you've had and lessons that you've learned, things you've accomplished, obstacles you've overcome, things like that, that's going to build trust with your listener. That's going to position you as someone that knows what they're talking about, knows what they're doing. And people aren't listening to a podcast hoping to get a great sales message or hoping to hear a great elevator pitch. They're wanting to learn something and they're wanting to find people who are passionate about things that they're interested in. So, by just focusing on telling stories about things that you've done in your industry and in your career, it's going to build that trust so that when people start to think about what it is that you do, instead of thinking, okay, like, let me learn how to do this myself, they'll remember this person talked about this and this person knows how to do it. So, they'll know to reach out to you. And what I really try to get people to understand is that you're not here to gatekeep information. And some people will go on a podcast and they'll tell you just enough to hook you,
Yeah.
just really just like graze the surface. But if you want to be able to do anything with the information, you need to pay me, you need to hire me to do it. But instead, I like to give everything and I'll tell people exactly how I do what I do. I'll give them the steps, I'll give them the tools, I'll tell them what websites I use as subscriptions to support what I'm doing. Because if they're not in a position to pay me for it, I'm not losing anything by telling them how to do it themselves. But if they are in a position, they're not going to take the time to learn it and follow all of my steps. They're going to find someone to do it for them. And what I've done is just proven step by step that I know what I'm doing.
Yes.
And that's the kind of method I try to teach, because we live in a world of ask who, not how. So by explaining how you do it and teaching it publicly, you're proving that you are that who.
Yeah, I think what you just described, what you just said, is something I really like pushing out, because I usually tell people that the best clients you would have for your business are those who are ready to pay money to save their time. So how to do almost everything is online, and probably if you do a bit of Google, you can find out how to do most things. But for those who really value their time, yes, you can Google and find out, or you might even know how to do it, but it's usually better just giving it to an expert. So for instance, maybe my car goes bad, I can either go out there and leave my computer and start trying to figure out what went wrong with it. So I look for an expert and just sort it out for me, and I give you some money, and it's not my problem, it's yours. So yeah, so that's
Yeah. If people wanted to do everything by themselves, there would be so many industries that just don't exist anymore.
yes.
There wouldn't be
Yes.
Uber because, well, I can just drive myself. There wouldn't be lawn care services because I can do my own lawn. There's so many things that people think that just because someone knows how to do it or they understand the steps to it, they're going to do it. And it makes me think of like changing a flat on my car. Like theoretically, I know how to do it. I understand the concept. But if I actually get a flat and you just hand me a wrench, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm going
Yeah.
to call AAA. And it's the same thing. It's I can teach you what I do and show you what I do, but you'll still have to take the time to understand it on a deeper level and in a more practical sense. And people
Yeah.
don't have that kind of time.
Yeah. I think I heard something recently. I can't remember where they say give away the information and tell the implementation. So
Yeah, it's always easier in theory than in practice.
it is. So now there's I think this school of thought. I've had this podcast for a while. I think there's over 100 episodes, and I've seen a couple of okay, for this podcast, I usually, a few minutes before we started recording us when we first met, when we first spoke to each other. But I've had a couple of times where people say, okay, they want to have the questions ahead of
Mhm.
the recording. So, what are your thoughts on that? I think that's the first part.
That's I actually get asked that a lot. And I think of it there's when I get questions ahead of time from a host, it kind of makes me feel like they are not really experienced in hosting because the questions almost serve as a crutch. And it also could mean that they're not sure how experienced the guest is. And for the same reason, those questions serve as a crutch. So if I'm not that great at interviewing and having a clear conversation, I'm going to want those questions to fall back on. But at the same time, if the guest isn't that great at turning an interview into a conversation, they're going to need those questions to fall back on. So it's kind of like the crutch of the podcast world, and it's like the safety net. But really, the goal of any podcast is to have a conversation. I hate the term interview when it comes to podcasting because that's not really what it should be. It should be a conversation. So, without having that list of questions, you're able to answer more naturally. And when you have the questions, you end up answering like you're reading a script, and it sounds scripted. It sounds so obvious that it's canned. And that's not as authentic and it's not as easy to listen to.
I think I have a podcast. That should be like the second or third one I did, where I had the questions in advance, and I don't even want to watch it.
Yeah, if you have the questions, the goal should be to not actually need them. They're just the backup.
Right, I
They're
don't
the
want to
safety net
watch
just
it.
in case.
Yeah, because it was
Oh, but
actually
the first
horrible.
podcasts are always terrible. The first
Yeah.
ones are always terrible. And that's as a host, that's as a guest, whatever it is. And I have these conversations all the time with people who want to start guesting or want to start podcasting. And I always say that like the goal that you should set is to be embarrassed, because I
Hmm.
want you to look back in a year at your first podcast that you just did today and be so embarrassed, because that means that you've gotten so much better. And even I do this professionally. I'm on podcasts almost every day. And I can look back at my old podcast episodes and be like, what was I thinking? Why did they let me on this show? This is terrible. Or I'm a published author. I've won literary awards. I can look back at things I wrote a year or 2 years ago and think, who let me put that online? Why was nobody telling me to stop? This is
Yeah.
terrible. So, but at the time it was good. So, really, if you're embarrassed of the things that you're doing now, it's a good sign. It just means that you've learned and you've grown and you've improved. So, I am happy to be embarrassed. I make a goal to be embarrassed.
And I think that's one thing that actually led me to start this podcast, because I'm actually an introvert, a very horrible
Oh,
introvert.
me
Like
too.
I barely leave my house. Okay. I
Oh,
think there's a lot of
yeah.
us.
See, that's the thing, that people think that podcasters are super extroverted because we talk for a living, but we're only talking to one person. Like, this is just, I'm
Hmm.
talking to you. I'm not talking to everyone that's listening. Like, I theoretically I am, and I like we strive to make it feel like a conversation that they can be a part of. But as we're doing it, we're talking to one person, and that's kind of easy. But when you are actually, like, I hate public speaking. I do it constantly, but I hate it. And it's so much different, but people assume it's like a similar skill set to podcasting, and it's so not.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very, very true. So now, I think going from that, okay, so preparing the questions in advance. At times it makes you use them as a crutch. It makes you appear scripted. So what's the best way for a business owner who wants to get on podcast to prepare for these appearances and still pass the message and still be their authentic selves?
Yeah, well, I will add that if you can have the questions and just have the goal be to not have to ask them. So you can have them as a fallback, and that's fine. But just if the conversation's not flowing, you use them. But hopefully, the conversation flows better that you don't have to.
Yeah.
But for someone preparing to be on a podcast, um, the first thing is to understand the value that you're trying to bring in the message, so that you can prepare the stories that you want to tell and be really clear with it. Um, and have a call to action really planned out. And the goal with your call to action is to be that you don't have to be selling throughout the episode. You don't have to be relying on marketing messages. But at the end of almost every podcast, the host is going to say, like, how can people learn more about you? How can people find out something or get in contact with you, find out about your services? That's when you give your one marketing message. So, to use a podcast guest opportunity strategically, you want to really prepare that answer, and generally, you're going to want to do that in a way that has some kind of lead magnet, some way that you can capture the information of the people listening. Because 100 people can listen to a podcast, but if they don't have something to do after it, nothing's going to happen. You have to tell them what you want them to do. So, preparing some kind of lead magnet that is like the next step in a conversation that digs deeper into something you were talking about, that gives just a really valuable piece of content to your listeners, that's going to be the way that you can take that conversation offline and actually have a conversation with that person.
Okay, so I think you should have your CTA prepared. You should have a lead magnet prepared. And when you're looking at preparing this lead magnet, what are some important things a lead magnet should have, at least, so that if someone finally gets around to downloading it, they are more likely to end up working with you.
Yeah. So the lead magnet, it should be the natural next step. So, like right now, I'm talking about lead magnets and why you need one. And then I actually have a lead magnet that is a book of 50 ideas for lead magnets. So that is a next step. If I'm talking about the strategy and why you need it, that next step would be how to do it and what would a lead magnet look like. So it has to be just a natural continuation of the conversation, because you already know that if they're listening to that conversation, they're interested in the topic. So if you were to throw out just a generic lead magnet about just something else, it's not going to be effective, because it has to be content that you already know the listener is interested in. So making sure it has that hook basically is going to be really important, and making it really easy to find. So for me, I have probably 15 different lead magnets, so that no matter who I'm talking to, I have something specific for them. And every single one has its own URL, it has its
Hmm,
own unique domain name, because I
nice.
want it to be really easy to find. Because again, this is a podcast. People are listening. They're not sitting there with a pen and paper taking notes. They're not, generally, they're driving or they're doing something else more active. So this is very passive. So you want them to be able to have one easy URL to remember. So I'm not going to say go to favoritedaughtermedia.com slash something, something, something slash something,
Yeah.
something podcast. Instead, for the one with the lead magnets, it's favoriteleadmagnets.com.
Hmm.
So it's just one easy URL to remember. It's related to the content so that it's like another way to jog their memory. And when they open that page, it's right there. They don't have to look for it. It's right on that landing page. But it's also just a page on my website. So if they want to take another step and look at my services, find my social media, find my contact information, things like that, it's really easy for them to get to. But I don't have to tell them to do all of those steps. I just tell them one step. Because if you tell them to do one thing, they'll do it. If you tell them to do 12 things, they'll do nothing. That's
True.
generally the rule of thumb.
True. 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 True, and I think I had that conversation you just talked about the URL for the lead magnet, because I had a guest on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. I think the episode should be out in a bit,
Simona?
and hmm? No,
Simona
no, not
Constantina?
Simona.
Oh,
No, no, no. Simona went live today. Was it today? Yeah, Simona
yes.
went live today. Yeah. So
Okay.
I had another guest, and the link they gave was letters, numbers, like something, something, something. I'm like, no, 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 this won't work. This won't work.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has
Because
to
if,
be easy.
yeah, because even if it's on the screen, it will take a while to write it down. And I'm like, okay, probably you can go through your hosting and do a redirect from your main domain, just something simple.
That's
And
exactly what I do. I am the queen of domains. I think I own like 30 something domains,
oh, you're worse
and it's
than
just
me.
you. Yeah, you just redirect it, go into GoDaddy, hit 301 redirect, send it to whatever
Yeah.
landing page on your website, and it just makes it easy. I think almost every single page on my website has its own domain name.
Wow.
And even if it's not a lead magnet, even if it's just for a service, they all have their own, so that if I'm talking to somebody, I can send them directly to the page that I want them to
Mm,
look at. And not only is that going to make it easy for them, it actually works as a credibility builder.
mm,
Because if I'm talking to someone in a specific industry, I'll have a URL for that industry. So if I'm talking to real estate agents, because real estate agents are one of my target clients, I want to
yeah.
help them create podcasts to build their business. So if you go to podcastforrealestate.com, it's my website.
Wow.
And that sounds like, that makes me sound like I'm the person for this
For
job,
them.
because I'm
Yes.
not telling you go to favoritedaughtermedia.com/services/real estate. It's just podcast for real estate. It's
Nice.
really great for credibility.
Nice. I think that's a very important tip. I think anyone listening should pick up. It's going to help a lot.
Yes. And they're like, what, $11.99 for the first year. If
Right?
you
So it's
if
not.
you stop using it, you stop targeting them, then you stop paying for it. But
And
it's worth the $12, I
yeah.
promise.
And I think to make it easier, just like $1 a month.
Basically, GoDaddy needs to sponsor me. The amount I push buying URLs, they really need to sponsor me.
Okay, so now I think one question business owners would always have, and I think they would ask when you pitch podcast guests into them as a way to grow their business is, what is the return on investment they should expect? Because I think podcast guesting is something, it's more of your time being spent. The equipment is not really, maybe you have a mic, you have some lighting, and not really much. But yeah, your time as a business owner, which you could have used to do something else, you're using it on podcast guesting. So, what kind of returns should they expect from podcast guesting, or maybe to make it better? Do you have any examples of business owners that have seen good returns doing podcast guesting?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few ways that I can answer that. And first, you said for equipment, please buy a microphone. Yes, if you're going to be on a guest on a podcast, please, please, please buy a mic. You can get a good one on Amazon for $100.
Yeah,
But it's interesting to talk about ROI when it comes to podcast guesting, because it's going to vary so much, and it's kind of hard to measure. So I actually prefer looking at ROI in terms of return on impact.
mm,
And when you look at it that way, you're going to see a lot more dramatic impact. And it comes down to what you're doing with the episodes that you guest on. Cause I've had a lot of people come to me saying, I've guested on these podcasts and nothing came of it.
yeah.
There's absolutely no value there. And then I asked them what they did with the episode. Well, I was on it. That's not enough. You need to be doing something with that content. So when you guest on a podcast and then you're able to put that on your website as a blog and talk about what you talked about, you're adding SEO power to your website. That's going to impact your web traffic. You're putting it up on social media. You're adding clips and reels and everything from that content. That's not only giving you content for your social and just making it active on social, but you're showing people that you were on this podcast, you talked about things that you know about, your positioning yourself as that thought leader and as that expert. That's impacting your brand. There's so many different ways that it's going to impact. So if you just look at it in terms of, well, I went on the show and that's going to do it, it's really not enough. You have to be doing more with it. And even if you go on, say, 5 podcasts and you post them on your social media saying, I was a guest on this podcast, we talked about this, check it out, and that's all over your social, is all these links to these podcasts, people don't actually have to click to watch it. They don't have to do anything with that link. But just having it say that I was a guest on all of these shows, that's instant credibility,
Mm,
because you are clearly must be a thought leader in your space if all of these podcasts are inviting you on to talk about what you're doing.
nice.
So that's going to have a huge impact on your brand, on your credibility, on that trust factor that you're building. Because at this point, if people find out about you, they're not going to your website anymore. It used to be first stop is I'm going to their website. Now it's I'm going to their social media. It's I'm going to their Facebook page.
Yeah.
If you're a little younger than me, then I'm going to their Instagram. But the days of just the website are gone. It's all social media. So as you're going on these shows, you're taking this content that is generally high quality video content. You're using it to fill up your profiles. You're positioning yourself as an expert, and you're able to just show all of these different people, these hosts that wanted your input. So that's going to have a really great return. But talking about from an actual investment standpoint, I know clients who have gotten, like, they were on a podcast years ago and it went viral. It had a whole lot of downloads, whole lot of views on YouTube, and it's been 4 years. They're still getting people into their inbox. They're still getting people on their mailing list. They've gotten multiple clients that was hundreds and thousands in revenue. And it really is just a matter of getting on the right shows, having the right message, having a good lead magnet, and doing something with it. Because again, even if you have a lead magnet and you don't do anything with those emails that you get, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get people that just call you out of the blue because they heard you on a podcast. You have to actually take those email addresses and have a nurture campaign, have a drip campaign, reach out to them personally, do something. So it's really hard to say what an ROI is going to be, because it really just matters how much effort you put into it, because it's not something that's just passive,
So I think
which is a really long
one
way to
thing.
answer that question.
Yeah, I think the question was answered, because I think what you're saying is the work isn't just in appearing on the podcast and forgetting about it till it's published. Most of the work is after the podcast is published.
Yes, it's preparing, it's knowing what you're going to say, it's having the systems in place to capture listeners, and then it's doing something with it. Podcasting, whether it's hosting or guesting, it's not a marketing plan. It does not exist in a vacuum. It is a piece of a greater plan. And it's an amazing piece. It's one of the best marketing strategies that I know of. It's why I focus my entire career on it. I
Wow.
have a podcast productions company and a podcast guesting company. I am obsessed with this medium, but you have to really put the work in and put the time in to make sure you're getting the most out of the content.
Nice. So now you mentioned something, getting on the right shows in the previous
Mhm.
answer. So how do you know the right shows for your business?
That's going to depend on a few different factors. And the first and probably most important is the audience. You want to be talking to a podcast that talks to the people you want to talk to. It's kind of as simple as that. Um, and podcasting is so powerful in that way because the audiences are really niche. So you can find a podcast that speaks directly to exactly who you want to talk to. One of the podcasts that I produce is for female financial advisors working within financial services. That's specific. So if someone wants to talk directly to female financial advisors, that is a perfect podcast for them to go on. So it's looking at who that audience is and who your audience is and finding that overlap. But then you also want to look at things like the host, because I know a lot of people who have gone on podcasts and they did not jive well with the host and it was just uncomfortable.
True.
Or maybe they have completely opposite views on topics, very opposite political ideas, things like that, that just sneak into these interviews. If you're not comfortable having a conversation with the host, if it doesn't feel authentic and feel natural, it's not going to be a good conversation. So not only do you want to make sure the audience matches, but look into who the host is. Listen to some episodes, find out what their interview style is, find out what they do for a living, and if it meshes with what you do. Because it's not necessarily even just the audience you want to talk to. You also are talking to the host. And sometimes the host of the show can have an opportunity to be a partner, collaborate on projects, things like that. They are also a great contact. So finding a host that fits well with what you do, the audience that fits well, and then the style of the show. You want it to be one that you feel comfortable talking about. There's shows that they'll ask you about your business, or there's shows that they bring you on because you're a business owner, but they ask you about your childhood trauma. Which one do
Yeah.
you want to go on? That's up to you. So there's a lot of factors to look at, and you just have to do your homework.
Okay. So now there's I think one thing is that podcast guessing seems to be catching up these days, because I think I was just talking with someone on Sunday, and like I was going through my email and I have so many pitches to get on this podcast. and,
Yep.
and yeah, at times I'm wondering, I'm supposed to be working. Why am I looking at all these emails? So, so I think one thing is that if you look at the market, the guesting scene from that end, it seems to be saturated. So, what would you say is a way for a guest or a potential guest to stand out so that when they pitch to a podcast, they are more likely to be selected and get on that podcast?
Sure. So, first, if you already have shows that you've guested on, promote the heck out of those episodes. Put them all over your social, put them on your website, send them to your email list, because as a host, they want to bring on people that are going to promote their show.
Hmm.
So it's going to, if they're looking at you as a potential guest and you've said somewhere in your pitch, like, I've been on these podcasts, and then they look and they can't see anything, they have no idea what you're talking about, that's not a good look. So make sure that you're promoting the shows that you've been on and giving them the love that they deserve, because that's going to make you look like a good guest. But then it just comes down to the pitch, and the pitch is where everyone seems to get it wrong. It's really, really interesting just to see the same mistakes getting made all the time, because the same as you, I host the podcast and I produce several others. So I'm getting pitched not only for my show, but for my client shows. And I scroll past 90% of them. And
True.
I don't, like, some of them I don't even read. And it's because they're all making the same mistakes. And the number one mistake is that they're talking about themselves.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've seen this. I'm sure you have,
A
but
lot.
you'll get a podcast pitch that it's just a resume or a highlight reel of here's everything I've done, and that's it. Do you want that? Like, do you accept that as, like, on your show if someone just sends you that?
No,
No.
no,
No.
no.
And it's, I always kind of sound like a jerk when I talk about this, just because I get really, like, heated about it. But podcast hosts, like, they don't care about you. They care about their listeners. They have no responsibility to anyone but their listeners. So if you pitch yourself to a show and all you're talking about is your own accomplishments, that's not going to get you anywhere, because we don't care about you. What you should instead be coming with is, this is the value that I'm offering to your listeners. And you could, like, taking your experience and really just honing it down to what that value is. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation, and knowing your value, knowing your stories, knowing what you have to offer. That's what you should be pitching. So if I were to pitch you about being a guest on your show to talk about podcast guesting, I wouldn't say I've, like, how long I've been working in this and my accomplishments and how many shows I've been on. I would say that I have strategies for being a great guest and getting on shows that can help your audience grow their business or grow their brand, because that's about them. That's about the audience that you care about. It's not about me.
Amazing. I think what you said is really true, because I think one of the posts I saw was I think the pitch was I think person said I've sold about $1 billion and this and that. I'm like, how does that take my business? How does that connect with tech your business?
Yes. Yes. I think there are three things that should be in a pitch, and only those three. And the first is an introduction, and as brief as you can make it. I sometimes skip it altogether. A hook or a connector. So either something that makes you stand out or something that connects you to the show and makes it clear that either you understand the concept of the show, there's something in common between you and the host, something like that. And then the value that you're going to bring. And instead of those three things, it's often like, here's my resume and here's my accomplishments. But it doesn't tell me what's in it for me. And this is my show. I'm the one putting in the effort and the budget, and I'm paying for the production. This is like, what are you bringing me if I'm giving you airtime? I'm giving you free marketing. So, really, just focusing on those three things instead is going to be much easier. You don't have to write as much. I generally don't send a pitch that's more than 4 sentences. And it's going to be more effective because it's more interesting. And if I get a wall of text as a pitch from somebody, I'm scrolling past it. I don't have time to read that. But it really just comes down to having something that makes you stand out and focusing on the listener.
Sure. Okay, so now I think earlier when we talked about equipment, you talked about a mic being important, and it's a lesson
Yes.
everyone who goes into podcasting learns very early.
Have a
Very early.
microphone, have a decent camera, have headphones.
All
If
three are things I struggled with at the beginning. All of them.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
at first when I started, I didn't really know if I wanted to podcasts. It was just
Hmm.
something I was trying out because I wasn't comfortable with it and everything. So I had this. It was actually my brother's mic, this $3 USB mic, and I used that to record the first maybe two um, solo episodes, and the sound was horrible. That was the
Hmm.
mic. The When after episode 10 or thereabout, I decided to start doing video episodes. I was like, okay, you can use my webcam, horrible. I can connect my phone to my computer, horrible. So I just
Yeah.
finally decided to buy a proper mic, proper webcam, proper lighting, and life has been so peaceful since then.
Oh, it makes, not only does it make you a better guest, and it makes like podcast hosts more likely to bring you on. Like if I get a pitch, the first thing I do is go to something that they've been on, whether it's like a podcast, a
Yeah.
YouTube video, something, and just check that they're using a microphone. And if they're
Hmm.
not, they're like that, like
There's no
nope, I
need.
scroll past, because it's the audio. Like we spend so much time making our show sound like a quality show, and it makes it so much harder when you show up without a microphone and that we have to fix your audio. And there's sometimes it's not fixable. It's just gonna sound
Yes.
bad.
Yeah.
And but even just knowing to show up in a recording space that's appropriate. So you don't have to build out an entire studio. Like this is my office slash home studio. It is a closet off of my kitchen, but it's carpeted. So there's
Yeah.
no echo. And I have my microphone, I have my camera, I have lights. I've had people show up to a podcast recording from the lobby of a Jiffy Lube because they were waiting for their car to get serviced.
Wow. Wow.
That's that's where you
Wow.
decided to do this. Like that is insane to me. Don't do that. Don't do that. But getting
That's
a
actually a
microphone, there's
waste.
this, it's such a waste of our time. It's not going to make it to air. Then we have to send you that, oh, I'm so sorry, the file got corrupted in the system and we can't release it. No, we're lying. No, we're lying. It was just a bad episode and we don't want to release it.
Yeah.
But you can get, like, I think the Samson 2QU is a good starter mic that you can get for like 50, $60 on Amazon. The Rode Pod mic is $100. You can get a like pretty good mic for pretty low budget. And when you're doing a, if you're doing a podcast just for fun, you just want to start it to talk about a hobby and you start with a crappy mic, that's fine. You're doing this for fun. But when you're doing it for your business and to grow your brand, you have to remember that you're representing your business, you're representing your brand. And if you're not showing up as high quality, you're making your business look low quality. And that's not a good look. You want to make sure that you're presenting yourself as best as you can. And that starts with the right equipment so that you sound and look as good as you can.
Sure. Okay. So now, over time, guesting on podcasts, on different podcasts, what's one unexpected benefit you've gotten from guesting on podcasts over time?
I have a really weird answer to that question.
Tell me.
So, my entire career is based off of one podcast I guested on.
Wow.
I, yeah. Um, I accidentally got myself booked on one of the biggest finance podcasts out there to talk about a
Wow.
really embarrassing tattoo I got while I was on vacation. And I became just known for that embarrassing tattoo. But it became, when the host wanted me on the show just to talk about that because he just thought it was a funny story. He wanted it on his
Yeah.
show. But it was then his job to make it a valuable story for his listeners, because again, we have a responsibility to our listeners. So he walked me through this story in a way that taught me how to tell a story.
Hmm.
And it brought out so much value from a story that used to be something I would just tell at a bar to get a laugh. Because I got a tattoo. It was supposed to be an airplane and it looked like a penis. It was that bad. But I told that story on a award-winning finance podcast
Yeah.
and live on air learned how to tell a good story.
Wow.
And fast forward, I ended up writing a book about it. It has won 2 awards. It was a bestseller. And I launched my company because I wanted to focus on storytelling because of how much I loved the whole idea of how to tell a good story because I learned it on that show. So that is my most unexpected um, outcome from podcast guesting. I can pretty much guarantee no one is going to recreate that. But you will get a lot of great connections. You'll connect with hosts that are amazing that can help you grow your
Yeah.
business. You'll connect with listeners that are awesome that are gonna want to work with you or partner with you. Or you might just become an internationally award-winning author.
Nice. And I
Was that the
wow.
answer you're expecting?
Oh yeah, that was actually very very unexpected. Very
Oh, well.
unexpected, and I think it just validates one thing I always say: just go out and do stuff. A lot of the benefits you get will come from where you least expect them, or come in ways
Yes.
you least expect them to come to you.
Yeah. And lead with authenticity. I could have like
Yeah.
I didn't have to tell that story. I could have said no, like no, there's no way I'm going on a podcast to talk about this.
Yeah.
But it was authentic and it was real and it was funny. And I still talk about that to this day. It's been years, but it's not it's no longer like a story about the embarrassing tattoo. It's a story about learning how to tell stories and how I found the passions that I have. But it's authentic. It shows me as someone who makes mistakes in their 20s and somebody who has taken really bold leaps and some of them paid off and some of them didn't. It makes me relatable because not everyone has all the experiences that I have, but everyone has done something dumb when they were 22. Everyone has a bad tattoo they regret. Everyone has done these little things that I talk about in that story. So it gives people a way to connect with me.
Very true. Okay, so now for listeners who have listened so far, enjoyed this episode, they want to connect with you, they are finally convinced that they should start podcast guesting, and maybe they want to learn more about that from you. What's the best way they can reach you?
So the best way to be a podcast guest, like I said, is to tell your stories and lead with stories that have value. So I have a free download. Like I said, I wrote a book and it's part journal and it's all about how to tell your story. I took the journal entries out of it and made them available for free download. So if you go to openthisjournal.com, you can download that journal and start writing your own story, learning how to tell your story, and reach out to me once you have, and I'd love to hear it. I want to hear what your story is.
Nice. Openthisjournal.com. I'm sure that's one of the 30 plus domains.
It's yep, it's on the list. My book is called Open This Book, so it's Open This Journal.
But that's a good way to stay organized, though. I think I should steal that.
I mean, tell people where to go and they'll go. But yeah, no, my book is Open This Book. It's the art of storytelling for aspiring thought leaders, and the journal is available for free download at openthisjournal.com.
Okay, so I think openthisjournal.com, that'll be on the screen for YouTube and any video platforms, and in the show notes for the audio platform. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really had fun in recording this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And for the guests, today we've talked about podcast guesting on the podcast. We've shown you why you should start guesting on podcasts. We've shown you, told you why, how you can share your story. We've told you the benefits you can get from podcast guesting, how it can grow your business, how it can give you returns. We've told you the minimum things you should get to be ready and how to prepare to be on the podcast. So if this episode helped you, share it with someone else you know it would help. Until next week when we are back with a brand new episode, don't forget to keep taking your business and go out and do something. Go guest on a podcast. Bye for now.